So I'm going to talk today about a bunch of syndromes, disorders, things that I have no real organizing principle for these, other than some of them are really thought to be neurologically related. And also, some of these things can also thought to be perhaps related to human evolution. And so I'll talk to you a little bit about that. And also human evolution in a sort of roundabout way, that how humans make meaning of their world. One of the things that we've evolved to do as human beings is to have big brains, but our big brains function in a way where we are able to make meaning of a world that is, at least for most human history, has been rather chaotic and sort of been out of our control. Okay? And so some of the things that we see, some of the disorders that we have are kind of fantastical disorders or having to do with fantasies. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we get closer to those. So that's the kind of the theme for today. Okay. I start out this lecture by talking about something, sort of as a case history, to talk to you about legends, fairy legends, legends of the changelings. And this is something that is prevalent in parts of the world, especially in the Celtic countries and in the UK, Ireland, and England. And I thought I'd talk to you about this. Back in the day, and again, this comes from a book on Irish folkways, but this is also something that gets passed down if you're in an Irish family or sometimes an English family or Welsh or Scottish. You'll hear these kinds of stories. We normally think about our conception of fairies really comes from Disneyland, right? You go to Disneyland and the little fairies flying over everything and spreading the pixie dust everywhere, and fairies are cute and wonderful beings that are friendly and nice and are just there for your entertainment. But actually, originally, fairies are really quite dangerous. And back in the Celtic lands in Ireland, England, they are to be avoided at all costs. And to be taken up by the fairies is not a great thing because they have a lot of power and they can do they can do things to you that are really bad. Sometimes they do good things for you. Sometimes they don't. They're a little bit, you can never tell what they're going to do. Okay? And so they're really to be avoided. And one thing is that mothers and babies, especially babies, were thought to especially be liable to be abducted by fairies. The fairies like to come in and steal people. Sometimes they would steal young men, take them to the fairyland, wed them to the fairy queen, and be there for her pleasure. And then if they were lucky, they would escape at some point and come back into the regular world and find that 100 years had gone by or something. All sorts of interesting stories like this. But babies are especially prized by the fairies to be abducted. Okay. And what happens is protective charms are hidden in the baby's dress or placed in the cradle. Children are taken to be baptized. Special precautions are made. Somebody put a piece of bread or cheese in the child's clothing. In this way, the fairies would steal the bread and cheese rather than steal the child. They had a custom of dressing boys in girls' clothing, okay, until they were about 10 or 11 years old. And this was a way to deceive the fairies because the fairies apparently were on lookout. They like to steal young boys more than girls. Okay. Now, what happens when they steal the baby is they replace it with an identical-looking baby, but that identical-looking baby is feeble and sick. Okay. So this is what the theme of the class, at least the first part of the class, is going to be today, about imposters, right? So they replace the baby with an imposter, okay? And that imposter is a fairy, and there's reasons for doing that. Sometimes these imposter fairies, these changelings as they're called, things have been explained that the changelings, like the breast milk of human mothers, all sorts of different weird explanations for this. You can read about these kind of things, but they would change it. So there's a baby is stolen, there's an identical looking baby. Okay. Now, one of the reasons that people think this was going on or to explain this sort of legend is that the idea that that human beings have a high infant mortality rate, especially back before modern times, before modern medicine. A lot of kids died a lot of kids died in childbirth, a lot of women died in childbirth, but also there was a very high infant mortality in the first couple of years of life. And childhood diseases, various things like that, infections, these kind of things. And how do you deal with that when you are in a pre-scientific society and you understand what's going on? You have this perfectly nice baby, and then the next day it becomes feeble and then it dies. And the idea is that these changeling legends arose as an explanation for, why, for no other reason why this child would be taken from somebody, why the child would suddenly become feeble and then would die. Okay? And the idea is that that the child actually wasn't dead, that the child that becomes feeble and dies that you have is actually not your real child. Your real child is being raised by the fairies, and while you don't get to raise the child and be around it, the fairies value these especially young boy children, and they will raise that child, and your child is still alive somewhere else. And this is a coping mechanism for the grief of losing a child, right? And again, there's other legends and practices in other cultures that are similar to this, that have a similar idea. Even the idea of disguising the child or keeping the child away from other people, these kind of things, you can see this also might have some value. You keep the child away from the people, you hide it, and then maybe it doesn't get in contact with other people and get coronavirus or whatever was going on back on those days. You could see some of these kind of legends may have had some, in some of these kind of things, there may have been some practical value. The other one, which I won't have time to talk about, I believe this semester, is the evil eye. You guys know about the evil eye? If you come from South America, the mal de ojos. If you come from Italy, where I lived for a while, it's the malocchio, right? And there's a whole thing in the Mediterranean about Mediterranean countries about the malocchio. If you come from a Muslim country in the Middle East, like where my dad comes from, when my child was born, the first thing my dad did, my dad's a medical doctor, he's a scientifically trained person, not given to superstitions, not religious at all. First thing he did was to call me and say, I'm sending you something, it's very, very important when this gets here, you immediately put it on the baby's bed. Right? I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, no, just don't talk to me, don't argue with me. When this thing gets here, you immediately have to go put it on the baby's bed. So, okay, Dad, whatever, you're being crazy, right? So a couple days later, I get a little package in the mail, and in the mail is a little blue glass thing with a white thing and then a black dot on the middle, and hanging from it is a little Islamic saying. It's just, praise be to Allah, something, blah, blah, blah. And then, okay, I'll go put it on the bed, and I call my dad up, okay, I got the thing, and I put it on the baby's bed. Show me a picture of it. I have to see where it's on the bed. I have to make sure it's on the crate, the little bed that the baby has. I have to see it. So I took a picture of it. I sent it to him. He's like, okay, good. Whew, I was really worried about that for a second. What are you talking about? He goes, well, that's the marsala. And this is something that is used in Muslim countries and also in Christian countries. If you're an Armenian, you will have a version of the same thing, except rather than having the little Muslim saying on there, it'll have the Lord's Prayer or something, Christian thing on there, right? This is something that people in these countries do to ward off the evil eye, and ward off the evil eye, okay? And in Latin America, what do you guys have? You have the God's eye, the little cross with the yarn around it. There's various things. In Italy, you ward off the evil eye using hand gestures. This hand, there's a couple variations. The evil eye warding off is this. So if somebody is going by, they're looking at your baby or they're looking at you, you can also put the evil eye on adults, right? But it also really applies to children, right? Because again, high infant mortality, same idea as the changeling, right? And so people do this, but if you're looking at me, especially if you're jealous, I drive in, I got a nice new car, you look at me, you go, oh, nice car. I'm like, oh, it's really not so great, right? So what you do is, it's really not so great. It's breaking down a lot, it's not so nice, because you don't want people to be jealous of you. Because when they get jealous of you, they put the evil eye on you, right? And then bad things start happening, right? The same with your children. People come with your baby and they say, oh, what a beautiful baby. And you go, oh, really, he's not that good looking. He's kind of got a big nose and he's really a little dumb, right? That you'll see this very typical in Mediterranean countries. If you go praise somebody's children, they will minimize the praise because they're worried about the mal de ojos, right, the malocchio, right? And so this is very common. Now, I lived in Italy for a while, so you have warding off the malocchio. You also have, lots of cool heavy metal bands in Europe and Italy now, so you guys know the heavy metal, right? This is the devil sign, right? So you need to know the variations of this, right? So this heavy metal, supposedly devil's horns, right? Right? The malocchio is different, right? And then you have this one. If somebody does this behind you, right? You know what that is? That's I cornuti, right? I don't know how you say it in Spanish, but that's Italian. I cornuti, right? That's the horns. That means that whoever is your partner has somebody has a side piece going on, right? So you'll see somebody's cuckold. This means they're a cuckold, right? That their partner is cheating on them, right? Usually in Italy, back in the day in Italy, that was very, very common. The joke is in Italy that the husband would come into the bedroom in the morning with 3 coffees, one for himself, one for his wife who's still in bed, and one for the lover who was under the bed. He'd slide him into the bed. That's the joke. And there's actually also a very interesting cultural reason for that too, which we're not going to have time in this class to get into. But I could talk about Italy all day. It's a very interesting place. But anyway, these idea about the evil eye. This is something that when the Spanish came to Latin America and came and conquered the indigenous population, and I'm going to say conquered because that's what they did. I mean, they weren't nice about it. They conquered the indigenous populations of Latin America. They brought this belief system with them, right? Yes.
What is the evil eye? Is it just like bad luck?
It's like you got something like a little jealous of you, so I put a little bad luck on you. I give you the evil eye. Yeah, I want you. She's got a brand new car. She's fancy, okay. A little X on you, right? Not really good. But that's the idea. Okay, that's the idea. That's the evil eye. So you got to ward it off. And what you're warding off is people's, jealousy of you. And again, if you think about evolutionarily, evolutionary biology, this makes some sense because, again, we live in this little, we evolved to live in these small groups, and we had to get along in these dominance hierarchies. And so suddenly, if you are suddenly acting more like an alpha animal, you get all the other animals are going to notice, and that could end up being bad luck for you. You don't know your position in the dominance hierarchy. Especially if the alpha animal looks at you and goes, yeah, I don't like that, kind of just smacks you down, right? So again, if you think about this evolutionarily, it kind of makes sense that we're really, really aware of where we are in the dominance hierarchy. And anything we do that sort of like sticks out a little bit could be dangerous, right? The Japanese saying, the nail that sticks up gets hammered, right? That kind of idea, that you need to know your place in the dominance hierarchy. So I got a nice new car, I got a really beautiful child, well, that child looks better than the leader of our group. His child's ugly, but mine's really beautiful and strong. Maybe I just want to kind of keep that to myself, right? I don't want to share that information because bad things could happen, right? So you kind of think about it rooted in human evolution, primate evolution. I think of it that way. Yes.
Is there any significance with the colors? Because I've seen like the blue one and I've seen like a red one.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a good question. I know in Latin America, I think the colors tend to be more red. Is that right? Yeah, and in the Middle Eastern countries, it tends to be the little blue thing. I know in Turkey it's blue with a red thing. I know in Armenia it's the same. I don't. Jewish people have the mezuzah. So if you go to a Jewish person's house, on the door in the door frame, there'll be a little mezuzah thing there. It's just a little Jewish thing. And that's the similar idea. It also wards off evil. The Italians have a bunch of weird stuff they do too. They like to wear red underwear on New Year's and eat lentils because they look like little coins. They have some weird stuff that they do. And if somebody gives you a present in Italy, gives you a gift, they say if it's a nice gift, guess what? You better give them something nice because there's a little, you better keep everything sort of equal, right? If somebody gives you a gift, they incur sort of a debt is incurred, right? So you got to make sure. The Spanish have a little bit of that too. I know there's some of that in Spain. I don't know about Latin America, but Spain is a little bit. Anybody have that experience? Somebody does something really nice for you, kind of like, I got to do something nice for them at some point, right? You kind of incur a little bit of a debt. All these things sort of related. Okay? But I don't know about the colors, so research it and let me know. I'd be curious. Really curious about that. I have a former student of mine who's Armenian, and we were talking about this one day, And she's like, oh, my family does exactly the same thing. Something happened when my son was born, and I said, yeah. So she actually came up with a lecture on this that she used to give in this class when we had time. But I've given you the short version. To go back to the topic, it's related to this because really the evil eye really has a lot to do with child mortality. That kids would die, and your baby would die, and be like, oh, somebody put the evil eye in your baby. You didn't protect it by putting a little thing on the crib or the God's eye or whatever there, and so that was danger, right? And again, this is related to the fact that human beings had a lot of infant mortality, and as one thing we evolved to be is meaning-making animals. So something that we don't know why it happens. It just happens. We need to make meaning for that. So we create elaborate fantasies to help us cope with, sort of these vicissitudes of life, these bad things that happen to us. And we still do things like this today, right? Maybe alien abduction. You can think of all sorts of things that we do. We create some sort of fantasy or story, fantastical story, to explain something that we don't understand. And this is something you find in human beings everywhere. And again, it is the result of living in a uncertain world and having big brains that are capable of making meaning, right? And so the changeling legend is one of these things. Okay. I mention this because this is one of the things that we're going to be talking about today. A couple of things we're going to be talking about is this idea of imposters, okay, of doubles. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So any more questions? I just want to give you a little taste of these kind of legend things, a little case history. And it's very interesting. Sometimes you can look at legends and fairy tales and these kind of things, and if you analyze them a little bit, you can find a little bit of a deeper meaning in these things. And there's been some really interesting books written about this kind of stuff, and if you're interested, I'm happy to pass some of those on. Yes?
So the utility stuff is that it creates like a stability. It kind of makes meaning out of the random occurrences.
Yeah, so something bad happens. I mean, your child dies, your baby dies. You are devastated. And what you're going to do is you're going to think, what did I do wrong? I must have killed my baby. I must have messed. Young parents do this all the time. I must have messed something up. My kid was born, I dropped him on one time and he hit his head, and I freaked out, like, oh my God, I killed my child, So imagine your child actually dies, and you feel guilt and shame, and you feel bad, and you feel immense grief. So, your big brain kicks in and you create an elaborate fantasy that sort of mitigates that pain, right? Baby's not really dead. That was a feeble changeling put in its place. My child's actually living with the fairies and having a good life, right? So it mitigates the pain, right? And again, one thing we know about human existence is that, life is suffering. And shameless plug, take my Psych 344 class. I'll talk to you all about Buddhism, which is the central tenet of Buddhism, that life is suffering. And various cultures, various peoples come up with various ways of dealing with that. Okay, and this is one of those things. Okay? Now, it also can get to the point where it becomes, these kinds of things become more individualized, and they can become more sort of delusional. And that's where we're going to go next. So I'd like to talk to you about something called Capgras syndrome to start with. This is a syndrome named for its discoverer, the French psychologist Jean-Marie Joseph Capgras. And the person's primary delusion that you see in Capgras syndrome is that a close relative or friend has been replaced by an imposter, an exact double, despite recognition of familiarity in appearance and behavior. Okay? So again, you see the relationship here to the changeling, right? That somebody that's close to you is actually not that person. So let's say I have Capgras syndrome. Let's say you're my sister. You look exactly the same as you always do. You act the same, you talk the same, you do everything the same. But I have a deep conviction that you are not my sister. You've been replaced by an imposter. Okay? That's Capgras syndrome. And a lot of times it will be somebody very close relative. A lot of times a husband or wife. Very, very, very typical, okay, with this kind of thing. The patient may see him or herself also as being replaced, as their own double, okay? All these disorders, by the way, all these disorders like Capgras syndrome, and we're going to talk about Goalie syndrome in a minute. All these are now under the category of they're called delusional misidentification syndromes. Delusional misidentification syndromes. There's a bunch of these. Sometimes used to be called the illusion of doubles, illusion of negative doubles, misidentification syndrome, non-recognition syndrome, phantom double, subjective, blah, blah, blah. But we really now, it's called delusional misidentification. And again, delusional means that the person has false beliefs and sometimes with bizarre content that are held with strong conviction even in the presence of objective contraindicated evidence. Okay? Even though this is absolutely my sister, they can do a DNA test, they can test her, make sure that's her, I still do not believe that no matter what. I held that strong delusional belief that she has been replaced by somebody else. And a lot of people with Capgras syndrome will typically also expand out and believe they exist in a world of impersonators. That a lot of people out there are not who they seem to be. Okay? And this feeling in a delusional world of doubles can be so alarming that it can drive the Capgras sufferer to, act psychotically. Okay? Now, also we can look at the other way around. We can say people who are psychotic are more prone to suffer from Capgras syndrome. Okay, your brain's already, delusional. You can grab onto this delusion of doubles, right? So Capgras syndrome. One or several persons known by the sufferer have been replaced by a double and identical-looking imposter. Patient can also see true and double persons. They can tell who's been replaced. It can extend to animals and objects. Person is conscious of the abnormality of these perceptions, but there's no hallucination. The double is usually a key figure for the person at the time of the onset of symptoms. If married, almost always the husband or wife accordingly. Okay. Now, this is probably a neurologically related disorder. It's probably not psychological in origin. So again, remember I told you this class, we weren't going to talk just about psychology, we were also going to talk about medicine and anthropology and other things. So this is really a medical thing going on here. Okay? And so they've looked at Capgras syndrome, they found cerebral lesions caused by head injury. So sometimes somebody can have a head injury and then later on this can show up. And these lesions are often located in the posterior area of the right hemisphere where face recognition is performed. Schizophrenic disease conditions, especially paranoid hallucinatory schizophrenia, also can be something that is found. And also in other affective or organic psychic disturbances. So again, anything that sort of can affect the brain can sometimes cause people to have these kind of delusions. Very common with people, more common with people with psychotic illness, with schizophrenic illness. Okay? It affects both sexes, but it's more prevalent, slightly more prevalent in women. Okay? And so it's thought, and when they've done studies on this, they found that 35% have an identifiable organic etiology. In other words, in 35% they can really tell there's an organic thing, but they also believe that probably most other cases, even though they haven't easily able to identify what's gone on in the brain, they believe that that's probably what's going on. Okay? And they can think of it as a failure of normal recognition processes following brain damage from stroke, drug overdose, psychosis, etc., etc., etc. So it can follow after car accidents that cause damage to the right side of the brain, etc., etc. Okay? Some researchers try to explain it with purely psychological factors, but that's probably not really the case. But it could be a combination of the organic factors. Something goes wrong with the recognition center of the brain, and then because of your personal psychology, you then start interpreting people as being imposters. Okay. The treatment. Typically what they do is, of course, they try to do cognitive therapy with everybody because that's just the be-all and end-all. But they typically also will treat people with by developing some sort of therapeutic empathy between the therapist and the person suffering from this, so that the person will trust the therapist. And then they'll also use antipsychotic drugs to some degree. And that also tells you there's a relationship here between schizophrenia and Katard syndrome. Again, there's been some studies where they've looked at this. There's a 1984 study, and they thought that they looked at something called prosopagnosia, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and they see, maybe the parts of the brain related to facial recognition, which has to do with prosopagnosia, also may be involved in Katard syndrome. And the study suggested they're both conscious and unconscious pathways to face recognition. So a lot of our recognition ability in faces is unconscious. We don't pay attention. It's just something. It's an automatic process. And we do know in people who have schizophrenia, for instance, that they have a hard time sometimes reading emotions in the faces of other people. We have a big part of our brain that's devoted to facial recognition. Because again, this is something that evolved. If you're in a small group of people, you want to be able to read the emotional states of those people in the group, especially ones higher up in the dominance hierarchy, because if they're pissed off, you don't want to make them more pissed off at you and have them hurt you. And so we've evolved to be very, very good at picking up emotions on other people's faces, picking up clues to their mental state from their facial characteristics. And this is something that when you look at schizophrenic people, that there is some sort of deficit in. Okay? And this is what Dr. Key studies. I don't know if you guys know Dr. Key, but she's been involved in studies at UCLA where they put schizophrenic people in MRI machines, and then they show them a bunch of faces and ask them, what emotion is that face showing? Is it sad? Is it happy? Is it mad? And they can, and again, schizophrenic people have a tough time with this, and it actually shows up in their brain scans, what's going on, that there's some deficit. And so the idea is that Katard syndrome may have some of those similar kinds of things going on. Okay. Any questions on Katard syndrome? Nobody here suffering from that? I don't suffer from it, I don't think so. I look out in the class and I see your students, but maybe you're all imposters, you're evil aliens or something else. Okay? You all seem to be students, which is good. Let's talk about another one called Goalie Delusion. This is a little bit like the flip side of Katard syndrome. This is a delusional belief that different people are in fact one single person who can change their appearance. Okay? So I go down, I see you here, and I go, okay, I know this is my sister. Okay? But she doesn't look like my sister. She looks like a different person, but I know that it's actually my sister. Okay? Later on, I go by, I see you, I go, no, that's my sister. You don't look like my sister, you don't act like my sister, but I know it's your sister. Right? Same thing. I go over here, later on, yeah, it's my sister over there. That's actually my sister. Right? So it's a little flip side of Katard. Does that make sense? And in one form, someone suffering from Goalie syndrome may incorrectly identify a person as someone else for no understandable reason. Okay? I like, again, Goalie delusion also occurs related to schizophrenia. Okay? It can be a secondary condition to schizophrenia, also appear by itself. And again, the idea is probably some underlying similar brain mechanisms at work. To attempt to explain what they're seeing, sufferers may become convinced that people around them keep changing their appearance in order to fool them for a reason they can't understand, and often put it down to some sinister motive. So my sister must really be trying to kill me, and she's changing into all these different people out there. And that's part of her plan to get me. Wait, she's going to surprise me and kill me. So I better watch out, right? I got to watch out for her. Now, there's a version of this. I like to think of this as a version of this that I call Malkovich Syndrome, and it comes from this film, Being John Malkovich. Anybody ever see this film? This is an excellent movie. This is a movie that stars John Malkovich, the actor John Malkovich, who's this guy right here, right? And also stars John Cusack and a very frumpy-looking Cameron Diaz, which is kind of funny. Directed by Spike Jonze. Really good movie. And in this movie, what happens is that people go to this building, And in this building, there's a half floor. Not a full floor. They go in between floors in this building. There's a half floor. People go into this, and there's a little hatch they can go through. And they go through this hatch, and when they go through it, they go and they become John Malkovich. They experience the world like they're John Malkovich, the actor, doing something, whatever he's doing, right? They are John Malkovich, hence the title of the film called Being John Malkovich. Okay? And so again, it gets at this idea of of this imposter syndrome. People are taking over, but now it flipped around. They're taking over John Malkovich. And what happens in the movie is John Malkovich gets wind of this, and he gets really pissed off that people are living his life, and he goes up to this half floor, and he goes through the hatch. And when he goes through the hatch, strange things happen. I'll show you this a little bit. Let's see. What's the next one? Oh, did I not have sound? This is him going through the hatch. Little tunnel. So I'm proposing a new delusional misidentification disorder called Malkovich disorder. We've yet to find anybody in real life who has a sort of where they see everybody as themselves, right? But hope springs eternal. You may find it. So, but it'll give you an idea of these kind of things. Everybody is an imposter, but they're you, right? Who knows?
Vulcan.
Yeah, Vulcan. Yeah, hasn't happened yet. All right. So another one that is similar is called Katard Syndrome, and this is was first described by Dr. Jules Katard in 1882, and this is a delusion where a person believes that they've either lost their bodily organs, or they've lost their blood or body parts, and from that to insisting that they no longer have a soul, or that they are dead. So I'm walking around, but my soul has been stolen from me, right? And you read about early some people when they studied some indigenous people, and they would take their picture and show them their picture, and people would believe their souls were captured. This kind of thing. It's somewhat, a little bit similar to this, right? Except again, this has correlation with depression, with psychoses, these kind of things. But the idea that you feel like your soul has been taken from you, or that you're dead. I'm walking around, but I'm really a dead person, right? And this is very similar to what kind of pop culture phenomenon. I'm walking around, I'm doing stuff, but I'm dead. Zombies, right? Zombies, right? Zombies are a cultural phenomenon. We tend to be more interested in zombies when things are going bad. During the last recession in 2008, the number of Google searches for zombies went, through the roof. So it tends to be something that we have, not delusionally, but we have an interest in, this idea of the animated dead, the walking dead. What's the other entity that is also dead but is now up and alive and moving around and doing things? Vampires, right? Vampires, zombies share these kind of things. Vampires tend to be more driven by greed and lust, and zombies more by just, instinct to eat brains. They're not very, you don't have too many thinking zombies out there, right? So these are very interesting. So I don't know, you could say they're a version of, societal Katard syndrome, but when you have a person who believes that they are dead, or a person who also could believe that they're possibly a vampire, right? We're going to talk about that later on in the semester. I'll talk to you a little bit about vampires. I don't think we're going to have time to talk about zombies this semester. I can't remember if I put it on the schedule or not. But I have a paper on zombies. You guys are welcome to read that. I should have actually mentioned Katard syndrome in that paper. I didn't do that. But this is something where somebody really believes that they are dead, and they have a firm belief that they're dead, or that they've lost their soul. They're somehow no longer animated human beings, even though they get up and they can walk around, they can do all the normal things that they do. Okay? I don't think I have an example of this. All right? And you'll hear about this sometime in the media. Oh, maybe I do. Let's see if something comes up with this. And a lot of times, they'll treat a person like this with psychiatric drugs, either antidepressants or antipsychotics. And sometimes they'll also, they found that ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, has been very helpful with these folks. Give them a little jolt in the brain, and then they actually will kind of come out of it. We're going to talk about ECT at the last lecture, and I'm going to talk to you about the abuses of ECT over the years, and then how it's done now, in a much better way it's done now. So we'll get to that later on. Prosopagnosia, face blindness. This is an interesting one. And this is very interesting because unlike the other disorders that we talked about, Capgras, Goalie, and Katard Syndrome, prosopagnosia, people do not have any delusions. These are people who have, there's a neurological malfunction where they just can't recognize people's faces, but otherwise, intelligence and reality testing are all completely normal. People are completely normal, other than they just have a difficulty recognizing people. And again, this has to do with facial recognition parts of the brain, this kind of thing. And let me see, I think I have a little bit of a video I can show you on this. Let's see, I think it's this one.
Prosopagnosia is a disorder in face recognition. It means that they can see a face and they know it's a face, but they don't know to whom the face belongs. They don't know the person by looking at the face. They recognize features. What they have trouble doing is putting the features together into a gestalt, in a kind of a whole. A person with prosopagnosia will be able to see this as a face, be able to recognize that it's made up of different objects, but he won't be able to identify this face as unique.
I probably always had an awareness that I didn't recognize faces very well. I would say that I see it holistically. I'm told that subconsciously I break it down into geometric shapes. I basically have categorized people as certain numbers of faces in the world, and I automatically put somebody in a slot. There would be middle-aged, balding men, slim, attractive, dark-haired women. I group them together and automatically put them in one area.
No one really knew about developmental prosopagnosia until about 20 years ago. These individuals have difficulty recognizing faces from the time they're born.
Well, there is my cousin's wife, who I've known for 25 years, and at a family function I had no idea who she was.
Can you recognize yourself in a mirror?
I scare myself sometimes, but I do recognize myself.
As far as we know, there's nothing obviously wrong with their brains. There may be some subtle problems that they have, either in connecting the regions that are necessary for face recognition with each other, or in having those regions smaller.
And growing up, I was best friends with two little twins that no one in the neighborhood could tell apart, except me. And I think it was because I knew them so well that every little nuance of their face was something I had memorized.
Not only is it inherited, but it's a dominant trait. It's carried on the dominant gene.
My brother suffers from the same thing, and he's very friendly. We tend to say hello to everybody.
Do you think that your sense of a good-looking woman is the same as your male friend's sense?
Yes.
You've done some research on this?
Well, I just know it's not different than, most of the other men that I know.
What makes a face easier to recognize for you?
If it was very distinctive, not even a clue who that would be.
Penelope Cruz.
Oh, really? So if I saw Penelope Cruz, I would look for the nose. And because that's head on, you can't tell. I know she has a big nose.
Sure, she'd be pretty pissed you just said that.
I know she would be. Sorry, it's true.
So if you saw your wife's face cut out of a magazine, you would know it was hers?
Maybe. Perhaps if it was out of context, I might have a problem with it.
If I was to leave and to come back with another woman, do you think you could distinguish my face from hers?
Absolutely.
Let's test it out.
Bring it on. It's tougher than I thought. And when I say Hillary is the one on my left, I would say that is Hillary. Mostly I think it's Hillary because of the smile. And I think I remember the smile.
You're wrong, Jeff!
I can't believe it. I can't believe it.
Are you a normal guy?
I would say I'm a normal guy.
So this is just something you've learned to cope with?
It's something I've pretty well learned to laugh off.
For somebody who can't recognize faces, you've definitely chosen a very interesting profession.
True in retrospect, yes.
Okay, you're a photographer.
I'm a photographer, photojournalist, have been for years, and I'm a photo editor of the National Post.
You're really busting that guy up.
So there you go. So there, remember I talked to you about compensation before? There's a good example of compensation. You're face blind, so you grow up and you become a photographer. Right? I thought that's kind of interesting. But you see what he's able to do? He's able to identify little pieces of the face. Not looking at the face as a whole. He's incapable of looking at it, but he can identify little pieces. Also, these people will recognize people by other bodily parts. They'll look at the shoulders or the legs or whatever, and they can see more of the body sort of holistically, but they can't see the face holistically. Right? So this is something you come across every once in a while. But again, these guys are pretty normal, even though this kind of face recognition, this kind of weird thing is similar to the other things, but doesn't come along with the delusions. Right? Yes?
Is it possible to call it that when they're about 90-some years old? Because they can still see everything else except the face?
Yeah, it's possible that you could be older than your brain, that part of your brain, the facial recognition part could be damaged, and then you could acquire it, at a late age. And again, sometimes with people with dementia, you'll see they have difficulty recognizing other people, whether it's face blindness or just difficulty. They don't recognize because of other things going on. But you could definitely see some of this stuff in older people. Yeah, other question? Yes.
Do we know why it's just facial features that they have?
The theory is that there's a part of the brain that is dedicated to facial recognition, and my understanding of the theory is that there's an idea that the connections between that part of the brain and the other parts there's something wrong with the connections, and that they don't quite process. They can't get the processing to the other parts of the brain, and that's the idea. But again, because we have a large part of the brain that is dedicated to facial processing, due to our evolutionary path, our need to do that because we lived in small groups. Okay? All right, so that's an interesting one. There's a paper in 1990 that was published in the British Journal of Psychiatry, and it asserts that Katard Syndrome is the opposite of prosopagnosia. Okay? Is Ellis and Young paper hypothesized Katard patients might have damage to the system which produces automatic emotional arousal to familiar faces. Right? And you see somebody that a loved one, when you see their face, you have an emotional reaction, right? You see that loved person, you feel this emotional stuff. And the idea is that Katard patients, that system may be damaged. Okay? And this can lead to the experience of recognizing a person while feeling something isn't quite right about them. On the other hand, prosopagnosia is the opposite. You have the emotional connection with the person, but you don't recognize the face. Right? Possible. And other studies have confirmed this finding, and they've looked at patients to confirm this who have Katard and schizophrenia. Okay? And they've also suggested the second factor is needed to explain the delusional belief about those being recognized, and the second factor is likely an impairment in reasoning, even though no definitive impairment has been found. But again, this would reinforce the idea that that some psychotic processes are possibly involved here. For the Katard people, not the prosopagnosia people. All right, let's find something now that's a little bit you may have heard about before. We'll call Diogenes Syndrome. You guys know this as hoarding, and I believe in the DSM now this is under hoarding disorder. But again, Diogenes Syndrome is the older term for sort of a more umbrella idea about this. This is typically found in elderly people who appear filthy, display extreme self-neglect over which they seem unconcerned. They may hoard, and they have either syllogemania or dysposophobia, which are basically the fear of getting rid of stuff. Full disclosure, I often wonder whether I suffer from this stuff. as I load my car up full of junk from my house and take it to the Goodwill, because you have to fight this. Syndrome has been found to be secondary to diagnosis, ranging from alcoholism, common, depression, dementia, also very common, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and schizophrenia, as well as being called a hostile reaction to the world, which, again, I think that's some psychologist, psychiatrist's way of trying to psychologize this. I'm not buying that one as much. Can be comorbid with Katard Syndrome. They often can come together. So you got somebody who believes that that there's imposters, but also hoards stuff. Okay? Many people with this problem revert back to their hoarding behaviors unless the psychological help is ongoing. This is the problem I have with the TV show Hoarders. Right? They come in, they show you all this hoarding, they intervene with these people, they clean up the house, you know, they talk to the person, oh, are you going to hoard anymore? No, I'm not going to do it anymore. Okay, see you later. Guess what? Go back a year later, that person's hoarding again. So these kind of shows do a disservice to mental health workers everywhere and psychologists, because it's showing a real lack of understanding of this disorder. Also, a lot of these people have dementia, and so again, it's not like you're just going to tell them stop doing it and they're going to stop doing it, right? That just typically does not work. By the way, little PSA, public service announcement for those of you wanting to become a therapist. Telling people not to do stuff doesn't work, right? How many times have your parent told you not to do stuff? And how many times did that work for you, right? You know, don't go out till 2 in the morning, right? Yeah, I'm still going to go out 2 in the morning, you know. You don't respond well to being told what to do, okay? Stop doing that. Okay. And then the person goes away and you start doing it again, right? Stop eating out of the candy out of the kitchen, right? Okay. I think I'll get some candy now, right? You know? So again, this is so it doesn't work with normal people. It certainly does not work with people who have dementia and these other problems. Okay, so again, this is a problem I have with a TV show, that you're making entertainment out of somebody's suffering, especially people who have a brain disorder like dementia or something. So I have a little bit of a problem with that. That's why one of the reasons I don't watch the show. And the couple of times I've watched, I've been not too happy about that. Let me show you a little example of some of this stuff.
So about a year ago, my mother fell in her house, and it was a few days before anybody realized that there was a problem. When I arrived, I found her with her legs sticking out by this door. She was lying in this hallway for 3 days without food or water. I guess what I want to say is that people will say that you shouldn't intervene, that adult parents can live how they like, they should be treated with respect, and their wishes should be obeyed. But this is what was the result of me and my sisters basically following that advice. If your parent is living like this, do what you need to do. Call the authorities, report them, make sure that they get the help that they need so that you don't find your parents in this kind of an environment. I guess that's all I want to say about that. My mother's doing all right now. She did survive, and she's being well taken care of. But don't wait until you get in a situation where this is the environment that your parents are living in, and you have to deal with these, and they have to deal with these unfortunate, terrible consequences.
Okay. So, what's the takeaway from that? Visit your mom, right? Hey, visit once in a while, before her house starts looking like that, right? It's hard when your parents live on the other side of the country, like mine, but yes, you need to keep track of your elderly parents. Very important, right? There are a couple types of hoarding. One is the very disorganized type that you see here, usually related to some sort of dementia, right? And then there's also the OCD type, where everybody has things like newspapers, but they're all perfectly wrapped and put in boxes and labeled and categorized, but still the house is filled with these kind of things. Okay, so those are the two typical types that you see going on. Similar processes probably underlying them, but the more disorderly ones are more related to dementia or alcoholism, and the more orderly kind of hoarding is related to probably a little more OCD-like, right? And you guys have seen the OCD. I didn't get an example of the OCD kind. You've seen the OCD kind? You go to a person's house and they'll have like boxes full of newspapers from like 20 years ago, and they'll be like stacked in order, and they'll be perfectly, and they'll have a string wrapped around them in a box, and then there'll be another one, and the house is filled up from ceiling to useless stuff, usually stuff that has no real intrinsic value to anybody else, but the hoarder themselves, right? And you go, why are you keeping this stuff? I know some people who, if you go to their garage, they'll be full of boxes. They feel like they need to save every box they ever got, and their garage is entirely stuffed full of boxes, empty boxes, right? And some of them are rotting, and some of them, but they're relatively organized. All these boxes, what are you keeping these things for? So again, you'll see this kind of stuff. Now, again, this is like full-blown examples like this, but you can also see this kind of behavior, sort of like, in a much lesser example. I worry about this for me because I tend to have a tendency to sort of collect stuff, and I actually have to consciously tell myself it's time to take things to the Goodwill and load them up. And again, this is pretty typical. I don't think I have dementia, at least hopefully, knock on wood, I don't have any dementia. But I mean, this is kind of a very typical kind of thing, especially in a very affluent country that we live in. We collect all this stuff, so you have to be a little bit on the lookout for this kind of thing. But especially if you get older, and again, you're suffering from depression or dementia, these kind of things, you really want to keep track of people. Yes?
So you can only treat it with therapy?
Therapy, it depends on what the underlying thing is, right? So if the underlying problem is schizophrenia, you're probably going to give the person some antipsychotic drugs. If it's maybe OCD, you might give them now. They're giving people like some medications for OCD, like antidepressants, things like that. Again, depressants, you give them some drugs. But all these other things also can benefit through some therapy, through having somebody you can talk to. And even somebody checking in on you, but somebody you can talk to about this stuff, also very, very helpful for the person. But it has to be ongoing. Okay, you can't just like, oh, great, I saw you for a couple days, you're good, all right, see you later, right? That's not going to do it, right? It needs to be some ongoing follow-up with these folks. Right?
If they refuse therapy,
if they refuse therapy, it's really hard. And then what happens is they come in and they find, and they had cases of this where they've gone into houses, and the houses have been like, there's essentially tunnels of old papers and crap everywhere, and there's rats infesting the house, and cats, and the rats live in there, and there's rat shit everywhere, and and it's unsanitary, and the person's clearly demented. Those people need to be committed. They can't live that way. They're going to die, and it's also a public health hazard for everybody else, right? Yes.
To go off what you just said, yeah, my dad was like that too. We have like a garage, and it's just a narrow path through it. We honestly can't even use it.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask, why do they do it? Is it because it makes them feel safe, or like it's a compulsion?
It can be both. It can make them feel like, again, it can be delusional that you can't get rid of this stuff, like it's important to them. Again, it can be OCD. It's like a compulsion to collect things and keep them. And again, the more compulsive ones tend to be more organized. Right, I need to organize stuff. I need to make these lists of these, put these things in order, right? Or it can just be the idea that you can't get rid of the stuff. The stuff is neat. You have a delusion that it's useful, or that you absolutely have to have it. Yes.
I work at a retirement home, and several of them tell me that they grew up in the Great Depression.
Yeah.
So the ability of not having a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
and then other people just growing up in rural areas, don't have the luxury of getting a lot of stuff.
You don't throw away anything. So I grew up pretty poor, and so I think that's where my thing. I don't want to give it away. This is all good stuff. I could sell it someday. Somebody will buy this. I'm not going to give it away to the Goodwill for free. Why would I do that? I had to earn that money. It was really hard to earn it. I always didn't have money. I used to not have anything. I got to keep it. So I have that stuff, those things going on in my head. And luckily, Goodwill gives you a thing for a tax write-off, and you can fool yourself into thinking you're getting a tax write-off. Yeah. And that's what's helped me to actually go through my garage and get rid of stuff. The problem is now, under our current administration, they're no longer getting any tax write-offs for anything. So now it's like, why bother? I'm not taking it to Goodwill. So my Goodwill trips have dropped off since the Trump administration has been around. But I got to find some other way to fool myself, and I can give this stuff away. And also this idea of paying it forward, So yeah. Yeah. I don't think I'm the level I need therapy yet. I have my wife to yell at me. That's been of course, she's as bad as me, if not worse. So both of us have to sort of keep the other one in check. And again, that points out something that happens with hoarders. A lot of times you get people who are on their own, right? The spouse has died or has moved away or something. They're on their own. The kids don't check in on them. They're on their own. And so when you're on your own, it's easier for things to spin out of control. If you have somebody else around who sort of keeps you in check, even if they have the same tendencies, my wife will come and yell at me, take all this stuff to the Goodwill, and meantime she's got a table piling up full of junk, and I'll go, get rid of your newspapers, right? So we'll, if one or the other wasn't there, I think the tendencies would be worse. And so this is something you have to really, you watch out. A lot of these people who have this are very isolated, and that's another problem. Right? Isolation leads to other problems. So again, this is something, check up on your mom, right? Make sure you go visit her a few times and make sure this isn't her house, right? Okay, so here's the one that's going to upset everybody more than this kind of thing, because this is just human beings, right? Which we seem to be, as a species, seem to be unconcerned with human beings that we feel are not in our immediate group. And this is, the next one will be very interesting. Yes, Kristen?
I have a question. Have there been any studies of children who grow up with hoarding?
I don't know. That's a good question. Look that up and let me know. I'll put that in. I think this idea about growing up in the Depression is very interesting. You grew up in times when things are really sparse. You're a little less, you want to keep things, right? But again, at this level, it becomes delusional. Or keeping old newspapers or something becomes delusional, right? Now, probably most of you guys, I'm assuming, are not hoarders, or probably most of you don't have hoarding tendencies. How many people here's files in their hard drive looks like this, metaphorically, right? Yeah. So we're going to have digital hoarding is coming next, right? That's going to be the next one that's going to come, digital hoarding, because I have like 5 gigabyte hard drives in various places. I've got 3 in my office here and probably 4 at home. And they're all full of junk that I've been collecting over the years, right? And why don't I just erase them or dump them? Well, I can't. There might be something in there that's interesting. I spent like 3 hours last week going through an old hard drive thing. I need to save all the stuff and go through it, right? I haven't looked at that hard drive in over 5 years. I could have just dumped it, But no, I had to go through it and look at it. So this is the next level of this is going to be digital hoarding, right? And there are programs out there now, believe it or not, that will go through all your hard drives and theoretically get rid of all the duplicate files and your pictures also. There's ones that will go through your pictures and get rid of duplicate pictures and help you to undo this mess that your hard drive looks like, metaphorically looks like this, right? Yeah, we all, and I'm not the only one who has that. I know I'm not the only one who has that problem, right? You guys are having that problem too now, right? Yes?
Yeah, my dad has every old phone he's ever had.
Yeah.
Saw the songs he's recorded. He's like,
Yeah.
there's some good stuff in there somewhere.
Yeah.
So he's got like an original iPhone.
Yeah. If he holds on to that, it will be worth some money.
It will be worth.
My father-in-law also is like this. He held on to every single computer he ever had. He had an original Apple II computer. He had an original Apple, like a Lisa, one of the really rare ones. He had one of the first Next computers. And at one point he offered me, you want to take the stuff my wife's making me, she's making me get rid of it. My mother-in-law's making me get rid of everything. And I said, oh no, I can't, I don't want more junk in my thing, right? I think the original Next computer, one sold on eBay for like $30,000, so I'm kicking myself I didn't take it. And the early Apple computers, many thousands of dollars now, especially in nice condition. His Next computer was in pristine, perfect condition. But because I'm worried about becoming a hoarder myself, I didn't take it, right? But yes, tell them to hold on to that stuff because he's got first edition. I'm not advocating, but again, this is what so normal. So people with problems, people with mental illness, dementia, alcoholism, depression, schizophrenia, they hoard. Normal people collect.
It depends on how you define
there's a gray area in between, which is somewhat problematic. So again, you got to be a little, and I have stuff that I like to do. I've got lots of hobbies that I really enjoy, and I have to really be careful about when I'm going. I'm a musician. I play in a band, rock band, and when I grew up, I was super poor. It was really hard for me to buy even one guitar. Now I can afford more guitar, and guitars are really cheap now. And so I have a garage full of instruments. I'm on the verge of hoarding guitars, right? And so what I've started to do now is I've started to donate some of them. There's a group up in Ojai called Girls Rock, and they put on camps for girls, and they, it's like School of Rock for girls, and they have camps every year. And so I started donating stuff to them, and they're a really nice group, and I gotta watch out. Here's a guitar I haven't played in 10 years. It's just sitting here. Okay, I gotta do something with them. So you gotta be careful. Martial arts junk. A tendency to collect swords. Because she knows. It's like I'm forbidden to collect swords by my teacher. So I only have one. But a boy, every time I see one, it's like, I could get a couple more. Like, no. So again, this is you got to watch this stuff. I don't know. Maybe I am on the edge of dementia. I worry about that. But you guys are going to keep me honest. So this is why I keep teaching you guys. All right. The kind of hoarding that's more, this is an interesting thing. So a couple years ago, a couple students came to me and said, we want to do a project for our 301 class. And somebody took this class and they heard my lecture. And in this lecture, I said people are more concerned about animal suffering than they are human suffering. Because when I show these slides, when I show this slide, you're probably going, okay, all right, I'll visit my mom once a year, but when I show you this slide, or this slide, you're going to be more concerned, right? This is animal hoarding, okay? And so at the student society, this would make a great 301 project. So what they did is, they did a project where they showed videos or pictures of animals in distress, and they showed pictures of humans in distress. They had people rate how upset they were. And of course, what turned out was, of course, people were more upset when they looked at animal pictures than human pictures. Right? That makes sense to you guys? Yeah. And I think somebody just recently, last year, redid the study and found basically the same thing. They did a little twist on it, but they found basically the same thing. Now, the pictures they showed were cute animals. The dogs, puppies, kitties, things like that. Right? Why do you think that people would be more concerned about cute animals than they would about other human beings? This again, I'm going to hit the evolutionary psychology really hard today, and not you because you already know what it is. So, yeah.
They seem more helpless and innocent.
Good, that's part of it. Yes, the animals seem very helpless and innocent. Why do they seem helpless and innocent? Why do those cute animals seem helpless and innocent? What is it about them that makes us think they're helpless and innocent?
I don't know. I guess they have less power to get out of the situation.
Okay, that might be part of it. I'm thinking something more concrete. Yes?
Could it be because we view them as children, like our extended family?
Oh, you're getting really close. Why would we view them as children or extended family? What is it about them?
Is it because they're cute?
What aspect of cuteness? What do we think of as cute?
There's like an innocence, purity aspect to it.
A what? Innocence, purity. Okay, maybe. That may play some role, yeah.
Their size.
Size. Now you're getting really close. Yeah.
Maybe that they can't leave or they can't abandon.
Yeah, so you said before that they're sort of, they need help, right? They need, yes.
They remind us of babies.
They remind us of babies. Very good. Why? How do they remind us of babies? What about them?
They can't speak. They can't say.
No, get close. No. They have something called neoteny. Neoteny, I'm pronouncing it, but they have features that remind us of helpless children. And we have conflicting evolutionary programming for that, especially for the males. The males have programming, and you see this in great apes. They'll come in, they'll raid another ape group, they'll kill the males, they'll rape the females, and they will kill the infants. Okay, so that's one kind of programming. They'll rape the females and have their own offspring. And interestingly enough, the females will actually become more fertile at that time. Wow, that's pretty bad, right? And we'll talk about this a little bit later on as well. That's one piece of programming about males. And this, again, this is a pattern, unfortunately, you see played out in human warfare. Okay, and I have a whole lecture on this a little bit in my other class. We'll talk a little bit about it here. That's one piece of programming. What's the other piece of programming? That we're in our small group and that we need to protect everybody's kids. The kids need protection. So when you see a small child, you will feel protective toward it, right? So again, context is everything. So if you're a male and you're in an army and you raid a village and you kill the other males of the village and you go find the females and the children, you might be in a context where you're likely to rape the females and kill the children of the other males. Okay? And unfortunately, that is a pattern that plays out in human warfare to this day, quite common. Okay? The one thing that people don't realize is that the corollary with war is rape. Okay? And there's been very few large conflicts where rape wasn't, wholesale. And again, if you take the Nazi Germany class, our 340 class, we'll talk to you about the rape of German women as the Russians invaded at the end of the war. As the Russians came into Germany, wholesale rape, maybe millions of women. Which is not really talked about much in polite society, but it was really a part of the war, and it's very typical in warfare. Okay? Also, killing children happens quite often. Right? We call it, now we have a nice name for it, a euphemistic name, we call it collateral damage, right? Which kind of minimizes what's going on, but killing children also quite common. So that's one piece of programming, that's one context. On the other hand, if you're just a guy and you're in a group of people and there's a kid in distress, the little kid falls down the well, what are you going to do? You're going to run in there, you're going to get the little kids looking up at you, you'll save the kid, you'll be a hero, right? So people do this every day. Sort of in a more normal context. I think probably if there was a kid in distress right now in this class, we would go and help that kid, right? You see a little small child, you feel very protective of it, okay? But we know from things like child abuse rates in blended families, right? So especially if you're a mother and you have a kid and you remarry and the kid now is a stepfather, on the whole, again, I'm not talking about your family, because hopefully your family's okay, but on the whole, if you look at the statistics, stepfathers are more likely to be physically abusive of their stepchildren than biological fathers. And again, it follows this pattern. Okay? On the other hand, there are plenty of examples when unrelated people, males and females, will help children who are unrelated to them because they feel protective of them. Okay, this is the other piece of programming. These pieces of programming conflict with one another, and they are contextual. Okay, a man that might be in a war, going in and killing, and raping, during a wartime may be a perfectly good member of the community and become a fireman and save children from burning houses all day long, right? Because the contexts are different, and it's very important to realize that human beings, we have a lot of programming that is that are very opposite but are not mutually exclusive. This is a little bit of a hard thing for some people to grasp. But very important things. Animals, when we see an animal, a puppy or a kitty, it has features like a child. What are children's features? The eyes seem bigger compared to the rest of the body. The eyes are big compared to the head. In an adult body, the eyes are, small and beady, and in children they're big and wide and they open up wide, right? And the head, the ratio of the head to the body size is much bigger. The head is much bigger in relation to the body. Those are things that we observe, and the skin is smooth. There's a bunch of other things too, I'm trying to remember. The skin is smooth. There are features that are maybe secondary sexual features, are not as pronounced. The men don't have hairy beards. The boys don't have hairy beards. They're not as rounded as an adult. One girl isn't as rounded as an adult female. And we pick up on these cues, and these tell us that is a child that needs protection. And it invokes that programming. We're going to put the wartime stuff aside for a second. That invokes that programming, right? That invokes that programming. On the other hand, we see other human beings, they're not in our group, right? Remember, we evolved to be in small groups. They're not in our group. And so any humans that are not in our group, we tend to go, we don't care about them. They're probably bad. They're probably going to attack us. So we're really wary of them. So in general, when we look at other human beings in distress, we go, they're not in our group, so what do we care? They're suffering, but that's good. That means they're not going to come and attack us, right? Okay. On the other hand, we see little children we want to be protective of, even if they're not our children. Okay. Now, what happens when you see cute puppies and kitties? What do cute puppies and kitties have in common with human children? Big eyes, large heads compared to the body, right? Neonatony, right? They have characteristics of children. They have those kind of things too. Some animals have evolved to keep these characteristics even into adulthood, right? Anybody here own a dog? Anybody here work with dogs, puppies, right? When your puppy, when the puppy's done something bad, what does it do? It gives you puppy eyes. What are puppy eyes? Big eyes that look up at you, right? Wolves don't have puppy eyes, by the way. Wolves are incapable of having puppy eyes. Puppy eyes is something that dogs have evolved since they've been co-evolving with human beings, right? Because it's very advantageous for a dog to have puppy eyes. Dogs that can show puppy eyes are more likely to reproduce and pass their genes on. The dogs who couldn't, the wolves are just like, kind of like, I'm going to eat you, right? Like, I'm going to get rid of that one, right? So the ones that reproduce more are the ones that have the puppy eyes. So puppy eyes now is something that dogs, most dogs, I believe, have puppy eyes. They're capable of doing puppy eyes, right? That wolves couldn't do because they've co-evolved with humans. That's a survival thing, to look like a little kid, a little baby, a little kid that's innocent, little puppy eyes, right? And so dogs have kept this trait, right? And again, you see this. There's also some theories, I don't know how good they are, that human females have kept some of these neonatony traits, that they tend to be rounder, they tend to be, so they tend to be, as we say in Japanese, kawaii, cuteness, right? The cuteness thing, again, that the idea is that back in the day, in early hominid day, that the females were, just as ugly as the guys, but over a period of time, that females, retained those traits that made them seem more childlike than men, at least when they're in their teens and 20s, early years. That had some survival value. I don't know if that's controversial or not. I've read that somewhere. I don't know if that's true or not. But you can see this idea of the cuteness, kawaii, is something that again could have some survival value. And if you look at anime, anybody here look at anime, watch anime? Sure, a couple. Come on, you can admit it. Come on, you can admit it. I watch anime all the time with my kid. Right, women in anime are drawn, and I'm going to talk about this later, are drawn exactly to evoke this neonatony, right? Big heads, big eyes, right? Even if they retain and what the Japanese have done is combine that with pronounced secondary sexual characteristics, large breasts, rounded bodies, those kind of things. They've combined that with neonatony to make the ultimate kawaii woman, right? Who does not look like a real woman whatsoever, right? But this, again, if you look at this theory, that tends to play out, look at anime, and anime is really popular, especially among young males, there may be something to that, right? I don't know. Not an unproven theory, great doctoral dissertation for one of you guys to do. Okay? So this is the thing. So animals tend to evoke less, when we see animals in distress, we tend to become more upset because they remind us unconsciously of little children who need protection than other human beings. I look at adults in a car accident, I don't care. It's not nobody I know, right? But a little puppy, oh my God, that little puppy is so cute, right? And so it evokes a different piece of programming. Does that make sense? So that's the theory behind it. And again, these 2 experiments so far that students have run here have confirmed this. We want to do more experiments. And we want to do more, and we want to actually include non-cute animals. We want to include some spiders. We want to include animals that are seen maybe fairly neutral, like maybe like a goat or something, like not like an adult goat, We have a baby goat, because there's baby goat yoga now, right? So talk about people exploit this cuteness of animals, by the way, for money. And goat yoga is an exploitation. You know what goat yoga is? Where you do yoga and little baby goats come and jump on you while you're doing yoga. This is exploitation of animal cuteness, par none, right? But we want to do the study and have non-cute animals, maybe a snake, some other animals, in addition to the cute animals, and then human beings, and then also have human children. And my guess is the cute animals and the human children are going to cluster together and the others are not. But that's another great 301 study. If you're looking for a 301 study to do this semester, come and talk to me, because I'd love to help you with it if possible. So animal hoarding tends to bother us more. So this is a trigger warning. I'm not trigger warning you about the human hoarding, because nobody seems to care about other human beings. But I will trigger warning you about animal hoarding. Right? Animal hoarding we tend to care about. So I can show you a little bit about animal hoarding. Let's see what I have here.
It's dinner time in Nina Koshtova's home, but there's no time to set the table or even get the plates out. This is the easiest way to feed 130 cats.
I feel sorry for one, then another comes along, then a third, and on it goes. But it's not like collecting stamps, as some people suggest. You don't need to look after them for years. These cats are really hard work.
Nina rescued her first stray 15 years ago, and with temperatures falling to minus 40 degrees Celsius in her hometown in Siberia, there are plenty of strays in need of shelter.
One is named Watson, one Sherlock, one Bush, and one Clinton. But I don't have a Putin.
As well as feeding her cats 2 meals a day, one of porridge and one of cat biscuits, she makes sure the flat is kept clean, so neighbours can't complain too much.
There are no specific problems, the smell isn't that strong, but what is annoying is the noise they make in the evenings. When you lay in bed, you can hear them scream or meow very loudly until late.
With only 2 rooms, Nina may soon have to stop rescuing strays, but she has made sure they don't multiply by themselves. All the male cats have been castrated. Sonia Legg, Reuters.
Okay, so I fooled you. That's a version of animal hoarding where animals are pretty well taken care of, right? And cat hoarding is something that you see every now and then. So I have a little story about cat hoarding. For a while when I was younger, your guys' age, I lived in a commune up in Mendocino County, and I was the assistant carpenter, and the head carpenter was a guy who was a friend of mine. He said to me one day, he goes, "Hey, I'm driving down to Santa Rosa, up in Mendocino." He said, "We're driving down to the city in Santa Rosa." I go, "Oh, yeah, great. Hey, you want to come along?" "Oh, anytime a chance to go to the city, it's fun, I'm going to go out to the city." He goes, "Okay, great, I'll go along with you." So we jump in his truck and we're driving down, and he goes, "Oh, I have to stop off for a few minutes before we go into the city, it's like a 2-hour drive, 3-hour drive. I got to stop off down in the Russian River on the way." And I go, "Oh, what do you have to do?" He goes, "Oh, I have to go visit my ex-wife and my daughters." And I go, "Oh, okay, and I go, "Oh, what's the deal with your ex-wife? I didn't even know you were married previously." And he goes, "Yeah," we're pretty good friends. We get along pretty well." And I go, "Why'd you guys get divorced?" And he goes, "Just hold on and ask me that question after we go visit." So we pull up down. I don't know if you guys have been to the Russian River. It's very beautiful. It's along the river. There's lots of redwood trees, and it's really beautiful and nice place. And this was in the summer, so it was warm out. And we're pulling up, and we see a house, like a little kind of cabin out in the distance. And I look at it in the distance, and it looks like there's snow around it. I can't quite tell. It's white. It's like, that's really interesting. And we pull up to the house, and it's like all this stuff around it. Like, what is this? Like white stuff. And we get out, and it's this fairly small house, about 1,000 square feet. And I look at it, it's like, oh, it's fur. And we get out of the house, and there it literally was like this thing. It was like 150 cats there around. And, we went in, and the cats are, like this lady, they were all taken care of, and, they're everywhere. But you could smell cat pee, and, everything's like, oh, and there's fur everywhere, just like everywhere. Covered inside the house everywhere. And the daughters are very nice. His daughters were very sweet, and his ex-wife was very nice. Everybody was very nice when we left. And finally we left, and I said, wow, that's like, I've never seen anybody with so many cats, like in my entire life. she must have hundreds. He goes, oh, yeah, she's got about 150, you know, and like, oh my God, you know, like, and I go, so why did you get divorced? And he goes, well, we were getting along great, and she brought home a cat one day, and I said, oh, that's cool, a cat, great, no problem. She brought home a second cat. That's great, you know, second cat, okay, fine, no problem, you know. She brought home a third. He's like, honey, that may be too many cats. We don't really need more cats, you know. 3 is a lot, you know. She brings home a fourth. It's like, really, 4 is, you know, I got to draw the line here. 4 is too many. She brings home a fifth. He says, absolutely not. These need to go to the pound. She brings home a sixth, and he says, it's either the cats or me. And then he left. So that's my personal experience with a cat hoarder. Again, like this lady, the cats are being well taken care of, or relatively well taken care of. That's not always the case. Okay. Profile of an animal hoarder: 76% are female, 46% are 60 years of age or older. That wasn't the case with my friend's wife; she was in her 30s. Most are unmarried, and more than half live alone. And again, that's a chicken and egg question. Okay. In 69% of the cases, animal feces and urine accumulate in the living areas. It's almost, with 150 cats, it's almost impossible not to have some of that. In more than 25% of the cases, the hoarder's bed was soiled with feces or urine. Dead or sick animals are discovered in 80% of reported cases, yet in 60% of the cases, hoarders did not acknowledge it being a problem. Okay? And it comes from this paper, from 1999 paper. What else I have here?
We know you only have about 1 cat right now. But
So this is a lady who's an animal hoarder. So just like, you can just listen to a little bit her talk here. Pretty typical.
2 daughters, and really proud grandma, 6. And you may call it a maternal instinct. And I'm proud that I'm just that person that to see something hurt and suffering, that I would help it, or that needed love.
With having 40 cats, at that point, would you have considered yourself an animal hoarder?
No, I didn't. I didn't for a long time. It got to a point where, due to my health reasons, I couldn't do it anymore, and it wasn't right for me. It wasn't about me, it was about them. And I miss them like crazy. I'd be a fibber if I said I didn't, but I had to do eventually what was right for them. And I love them all, and I will always love them.
Do you feel misunderstood by those people who would call you a hoarder?
Very misunderstood. Very misunderstood. I didn't do it to be mean. I did it because of what was in my heart and what I felt God wanted me to do. They're not just our creatures, we're all creatures of good Lord above.
So do you get a sense here of, I think this is important to point out, that people aren't becoming animal hoarders out of meanness, that they actually, there's a little bit of delusional here, there's some delusional stuff going on. They mean well. I'm taking these animals all deserve love, you know, they're God's creatures, they all deserve love, you know, they deserve to be protected, and they have some sort of delusion that they can protect all the animals, right? So they just keep taking in more and more and more and more and more and more and more, right? That lady probably there's been some intervention, she's probably been forced to go to therapy for a while, and so she's started to develop a little bit of insight into what's going on. But you still see the tendency, if they leave her alone, probably she's going to go back and start hoarding animals again, right? Now, this can get really bad, and you can find sometimes places where animal hoarding has just gone off the chain. Every year, 3,500 or so animal hoarders come to the attention of authorities, and probably 250,000 animals are affected each year. Between 2 and 5% of the general population meets the criteria for hoarding both objects and animals. That's why I say, like, I'm not too worried about myself, because really I have a lot of company. 2 to 5%, that's a lot of people have hoarding tendencies. Okay, 80% of animal hoarders have diseased, dying, or dead animals on the premises, and that's really a problem. Okay. Yes?
What are the animals on the bottom?
Those are, I think those are guinea pigs. I could show you rats. One thing I didn't show you in this lecture, I should probably show you, it's in my other class. If you take my 344 class, I will show you the rat and the snake temples in India. There's a temple in India where they believe that the rats are incarnations of one of the gods, and they feed the rats milk, and they allow them to run through the temple, and there's rats everywhere. And could that be animal hoarding? Well, potentially. I haven't really thought about that, but I should probably put that picture in here sometime and show you guys that. So take my 344 class, I'll show you that. 100% of hoarders relapse without treatment, so that's what I'm telling you. They will go back and do this again unless they get some intervention.
There's an episode of Hoarders that actually has animal hoarding in it.
What's that?
There's an episode of
Yeah.
Hoarders that has it.
Yeah.
Like, this lady has like 8 cats and like 15 dogs, but she leaves them chained up in her backyard, and like she doesn't like take care of them. So there was like
Yeah.
at least 4 or 5 like there
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
And I only know that because I binge watched Hoarders last year, but
Yeah,
still.
yeah. The animal hoarding ones, they have to be careful about this because people are going to get really upset about that, and then they're going to lose. People are going to get. It's going to trigger them. They're not going to watch, and so the ratings are going to go down. So they gotta be just very careful. I mean, you guys don't really think of TV people being so calculating about stuff, but they are very calculating, right? They know if they show full-blown hoarders, like I'm going to show you in a minute, the ratings are going to go down, right? So they want just enough to get your interest and not disgust you too much. So they're not going to show you the worst cases of animal hoarding, right? They got to be careful about it. And that's my theory anyway. I don't know if that's true. This is my theory anyway. They'll show you a little bit, and they won't show it every week. Is there a show on just animal hoarders? Maybe there is a show. I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't think they would do a show on just animal hoarding. Unless they did something else to make it, to cutify it, show some cute animals and, oh, a cute animal, then maybe they could get people to watch it, I don't know. But if they show the horrific suffering, people are going to get like, oh, that's too much for me. Let me show you a little clip here.
There's just a massive number of cats here in poor condition.
This is really the epitome of a hoarder.
When deputies searched the property of the Voice of the Animals Camelot Sanctuary, they found more than 400 cats living in filthy conditions. Rescue crews from the Humane Society of the United States say the nonprofit sanctuary was run by hoarders, people who collect more animals than they can handle.
They don't have any recognition of the poor health of these animals. They continue to take in animals. Although they didn't have the funds, the resources, the staff, no volunteers, the facilities are completely dilapidated and falling apart.
Dried feces throughout this area.
The HSUS teamed up with the Sheriff's Department and local animal groups to handle the case.
All right, okay. We got a better place for you.
Shelter operators agreed to surrender the animals into the care of the Idaho Humane Society and the Humane Society of the United States.
All the cats that I looked at are infested with fleas and ear mites. This is most likely its kitten. This kitten's also suffering from upper respiratory illness as nasal discharge.
Veterinarians euthanize many of the cats too sick to survive. Pictures of each cat will serve as evidence against the shelter owners. They now face charges of neglect and animal cruelty, which are misdemeanor rather than felony charges in Idaho, and those who are convicted rarely serve jail time.
Our criminal investigators have been working with the Humane Society of the United States and the state vet in collecting and documenting evidence for the criminal prosecution.
Voice of the Animals is shut down, but the HSUS cautions all pet owners to thoroughly check out shelters before they surrender their pet.
People need to be cautious, and we understand that there are occasions when people will no longer be able to keep their animals, but go to a shelter, visit a shelter firsthand, make sure that it's a reputable shelter.
Reputable shelters are exactly where the surviving cats will go, and where they will have an opportunity to be adopted and find real sanctuary in safe and loving homes.
Would you like some food, honey? Let's have some food.
All right. So I will talk to you later on about my work with the U.S. Humane Society, and when we get to talking about sexual fetishes, that there's animal hoarding, and there's animal exploitation and torture, which is really a different thing. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that later on, so remind me, I'll get to that. But this is give you an idea. This is more the really serious kind of animal hoarding thing. And there's been a couple cases of this kind of stuff around in this county. I think there was a couple years ago. There's some of these were found. There's also the thing that we've had in this county, which is people who've had wild animals, chimpanzees and other animals that are more potentially dangerous, and lions. If somebody had a lion or something somewhere, that's another kind of thing. I don't know whether that would fall under hoarding or not. That'd also be an interesting thing to do some research on. So again, if you're thinking about a doctoral dissertation project for graduate school, here's another area where there's a lot of potential for interesting research to be done here, and it can be very helpful. I want to talk to you again on the neurological theme. I'll talk to you about alien hand syndrome. This is again another one that is more medically related. And what happens in alien hand syndrome is typically what happens: a person has a stroke, and part of the brain that has to do with where the hand are connecting to the consciousness seems to go awry, and the hand will start to do things on its own, acting as if it is possessed and doing things by itself. The person will be unconscious, they will not have any control of the hand. The hand will start acting on its own. And they'll stop it, don't do that, right? But the hand will want to do its own thing. This is typically what happens after people have had a stroke. This is where you typically see alien hand syndrome, after stroke. And I think I have a video.
In her late 20s, Karen had gotten this very serious operation on her brain. The operation was to treat Karen's epilepsy. So her doctors put her to sleep and cut into her brain. And Karen says when she woke up, her speech was a little funny, but basically she felt great.
I had woken up and I was sitting on the hospital bed talking to my surgeon, and
then all of a sudden, her left hand picked itself up and started moving towards her shirt, started delicately undoing its pearly top button.
My hand was taking my clothes off.
Taking your clothes off?
Yeah, my hand was taking my shirt off. The surgeon was like, Karen, do you realize what's happening?
And then, all of a sudden, the hand seemed to get angry.
It was tearing the buttons off the shirt.
Karen kept telling it to stop.
Knock it off, knock it off, knock it off.
Her surgeon was screaming at her to control it.
Try to make it stop. I said, I can't, I won't stop it. And then I started to cry. I just didn't know what to do.
When Karen went home from the hospital, the hand, this new hand with a mind of its own, went with her. A lot of the time the hand was okay, but it would also get really upset with her. Like sometimes, when Karen did something it didn't like,
smacked me right across my face.
Your own hand. Her problem, the doctors explained, was alien hand syndrome.
This happens after you have a stroke. The good news is, in the majority of the cases, that it fades out after a bit. In a couple of weeks, they have this hand that kind of acts on its own, and eventually it goes back to normal. That one case you have where the lady has it long term, that's very, very rare. So usually this doesn't last for forever. By the way, I'm showing you Alien Hand from this movie. Trivia question: what's this film?
War of the Worlds.
No, good guess. Nobody? Oh, it's a good movie. You'll probably find the whole thing on YouTube. It's called The Day the Earth Stood Still. Very good movie. I think that's it. And he's an alien and he's showing his hand, so that's why that's only connection there. Okay. So again, you can read about this. It's neurological, and again, it's typically seen after stroke. And there's no known cure, but the hand seems to get back to normal after a couple of weeks or months. It's actually very common too. It's fairly common, not all the time, but by the way, a surgeon who's doing brain surgery would know about this. or should know about this. So if a surgeon has not heard of what's going on with that hand and know about alien hand syndrome, then you got to wonder about that guy. Okay? All right, let's move on to facetious disorders and malingering. So this is an interesting area, and I'm going to go through this relatively quickly because we don't have a ton of time. But people with facetious disorders fake, exaggerate, or self-induce various illnesses, both mental and physical, in order to become patients and receive all the sort of secondary gain you get as a patient, attention, nurturance, kindness, etc., that they feel like or they are unable to get in any other sort of way. Okay? And this differs from people who are so-called malingerers. Right? Malingerers are people who fake things in order to get something, usually money, disability payments, or they want to get drugs. You know, if I go in, I'm an opiate addict, and I go into the pharmacy and I fake, I go to the doctor and fake that I have some kind of horrible pain and get a prescription for OxyContin, and then go get that filled. That's malingering. That's not facetious disorder. Okay, they're different. You got to keep that in mind. Okay? I used to call this malingering psychosis. It's not. Malingering psychosis is where people pretend to be psychotic to get out of something, usually get out of prison. When I was your guys' age and in my last 2 years of college, I worked a graveyard shift at a mental hospital, a locked-in mental facility, and we saw a lot of this so-called malingering psychosis, where people would come in, we had a couple people who had murdered somebody, and what they did is they very expertly faked being psychotic, and then and then they got off by reason of insanity, and rather than being sent to a regular prison, they were sent to a locked-in mental facility, which on the scheme of things relatively easy to escape from. And they would come to our place and they would act psychotic, and then in the middle of the night, I worked the graveyard shift when there was only 4 of us. In the middle of the night, they would start to do threatening things that were clearly not psychotic and more like antisocial personality disorder. And a couple times we had to, how shall I say, deal with these kind of people with malingering psychosis in a different way. On every case that we had with malingering psychosis, the people escaped very quickly. And they would go over our 10-foot fence, which was, basically not barbed wire or anything, and nobody was carrying guns, and so they just go over the fence, and eventually the cops would find them and pick them up, bring them back into court, and they would have a different experience next time. They would not be brought to the mental facility, but instead be put in prison. Okay? People, by the way, have a very misunderstanding of guilt by guilt by insanity. Insane plea, you think, oh, that person's getting off. That's actually not the case. You can actually be put in a mental hospital easily for the rest of your life. If the doctors, the psychologists at the mental hospital don't feel like you've recovered, that you're still insane or you're still going to hurt anybody, they're not going to let you out. And so people who are guilty but thought to be legally insane, they can be put away for the rest of their lives very easily, and they don't have to ever be let out on parole. Unlike, if you go to prison, you get amount of prison time. When that time is up, or you've got good behavior, you can get out on parole. I mean, even Charles Manson would come up for parole every few years, right? They never let him out, quite rightly. So, but if you're up for insanity and you get stuck in a mental hospital somewhere, they don't have to let you out. I mean, they'll review your case and see if you're better. But if you're really, no psychologist wants to take the blame. If they let you out and you start, mass murdering people again or something, right? So don't think that that's necessarily something that's a, guilty, by reason of insanity is not necessarily, an easier way out. Okay? Now, and these guys back in the day, they got stuck in our facility, which was relatively easy to escape from, and that was the plan all along, that they were going to escape. So that's a malingering psychosis. Okay. That's malingering. It's not facetious disorder. Okay? Let's see if I have something here.
Diversifications, Calpana.
So this is an example. Give you an example of facetious disorder. This comes from the show Grey's Anatomy. You guys know that show, Grey's Anatomy? This is from the Grey's Anatomy show. Give you an example of facetious disorder. Facetious disorder, by the way, also used to be called Munchausen Syndrome. Heard about that? Munchausen Syndrome? That's the old name for it. Now it's called facetious disorder. And here's an example of it.
Name my villagers in Nepal.
She presents with multiple syncopal episodes and ventricular arrhythmia.
So you've been passing out?
Yeah, and having palpitations.
Past medical history of rheumatic heart disease with mitral valve stenosis.
They had to ship me from Zambia to the States for 3 months of treatment when I was 8. Rheumatic fever almost killed me.
Dr. Stevens, what are the primary causes of ventricular arrhythmias?
Valvular disease, mitral valve prolapse, stimulants, drugs, and metabolic abnormalities.
What? Out.
I saw that. I saw you take that pill.
Oh, it's my pill, you know. The pill.
It's not in your chart, and you're supposed to tell us what the meds you're on.
You're not my doctor. You shouldn't even be here.
She's right. You shouldn't be here. I saw her take unauthorized medication.
I'm on the pill. And I had grapefruit juice this morning. Since the juice inhibits enzymes involved in the metabolism of OCPs, I thought I'd avoid the interaction by taking it 2 hours after my meal.
She's a doctor in neuropharmacology, Christine.
Well, Izzy, I don't see oral contraceptives.
Guys, okay, well now you will. Would you just go back to bed and stop
She's
a good Coco.
No code?
Not anymore. You help us get her back in bed. Oh, gosh, give me a minute. Would you just go back to bed? Please, seriously, go. Oh, you know, Izzy, if she's on OCPs, we mark it down, okay? Yeah.
You scared us a little bit. How's the workup coming?
Electrolytes are within normal limits. Urine tox was negative and EKG's fine. Till test is scheduled for noon. Oh, and she's on contraceptives.
So?
That's what I said. Other doctor made such a big deal of it.
She didn't tell us before, so I documented it in her med list.
What other doctor?
Christina, she was wandering the halls.
Fine. Take her down for an echo.
An echo? What about cardioversion or ablation? Won't I need a pacemaker or a permanent internal defibrillator?
Although it would be unusual for rheumatic heart disease to cause ventricular dysrhythmias, we still gotta check your valves.
I thought your doctorate was in neuropharmacology, not medicine.
It is.
It's odd.
It's odd that I'm not jealous.
No, you have every right to be jealous. It's your territory and she's peeing all over it. What's odd is Brooke's patient. She's been in 4 other hospitals this year. Now, something's not right.
Hey, Izzy.
However, studies...
Hey, I have been looking for that everywhere.
Negative, right?
Oh, the echo test showed mild mitral stenosis. The TIL test was negative. We're doing EP studies.
I can tell you what's wrong with her without sticking electrodes in her heart.
Really? Just find a chart.
No, from the pills she took.
They were contraceptives, Christina. Why are you so obsessed with this? Just go back to bed.
I think she's doing this to herself.
You think she's inducing ventricular arrhythmia? She'd have to be crazy to do.
Okay. There you go. I'll give you an idea. So that, show you this video because this gives you a better sense of what this is like. The person is, with facetious disorder, will present as if they'll be somebody who's usually in the medical profession or a similar profession. They know a lot about medicine. They might be a nurse. They might be, a technician or have a degree in some other area related to medicine. They'll know a lot of stuff. They'll know much more than a normal person. That knowledge will help them fake a disease better. They will do stuff like use drugs or whatever to help enhance the faking of the disease. They're not doing this for any sort of secondary gain like money or to get narcotic drugs. They're doing it mostly to get the attention. Okay? And so that was a good example there of a woman in that TV show who was faking. There's a pattern of going to different hospitals, and a lot of times they will show up at the hospitals on nights and the weekends when residents are working, when there's not a lot of oversight, when people who might remember them from a previous visit aren't there. And they'll do this over and over and over, and they'll go to different hospitals in different places, and where people track them. They'll do it in the nights and weekends when their electronic medical records aren't as easily available, or when their paper medical records aren't as easily available. Now, with medical records being made electronic, there may be, it may be more difficult to do this, but there's still a lot of regulations about sharing medical records. Doesn't make it easy to share them, and so they'll pick a time when people can't verify their story. Okay? So very, very, very common to see this. Again, the disorder itself is not common, but when you see somebody with this disorder, you'll see this pattern will emerge. Right? Does that make sense? There's some variations of this. One is facetious ulcers. This is self-induced lesions, usually on the hand, and this is usually located on the part of the body where it's in reach of the dominant hand. So I'm right-handed, so you'll see the lesions here where I can reach. You won't see it in the middle of my back somewhere where I can't reach very well, right? Very typical, and the lesions will also have, they'll be kind of more regular looking. So the cut will be more regular looking. You won't look like just sort of a natural sort of ulcer. And again, if you're a physician, you'll be able to you'll get a sense of this kind of thing. Okay. All right, let's mention that one. That's one of the things. Again, same thing, facetious ulcer. DSM-5 now is recognizing 3 types of facetious disorder. Number 1 is facetious disorder with predominantly psychological signs and symptoms, because people will come in presenting with psychological things. Psychosis is a typical one. I'm hearing voices. The voices are telling me to do things. And physicians, you'll get a lot of attention from that. You'll probably be held for a while. They'll probably give you some antipsychotic drugs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? Second is facetious disorder with physical signs and symptoms. That's what you saw in the video clip. She's faking heart disease of various kinds. Okay, and then 3, facetious disorder with combined psychological and physical signs. Okay. Following criteria must be met: intentional production or feigning of physical or psychological signs or symptoms. Second is motivation for the behaviors to assume the sick role, not for other gain. 3, the absence of external incentives for the behavior, no money, etc., avoiding legal responsibility, those kind of things. Okay, that's malingering. 4th type is facetious disorder not otherwise specified, and that's, again, the placeholder one where you're not quite sure what's going on, but you want to give them a diagnosis of this. Okay? And this comes from this book, Playing Sick, by this Dr. Feldman. We're not sure about the pathophysiology of facetious disorder. We're not sure if these people have problems with their brains. There's been case reports of abnormalities on the MRIs of brains with facetious disorder people, which suggests that there may be some biology in the role here to play this sick role. We're not really quite sure about that. Some patients with facetious disorder have also displayed abnormalities in psychological testing. That, I think, is to be expected. EEG studies have been non-specific. We haven't really seen anything in EEG studies. The prevalence is unclear. Okay? Many authorities believe that it's underdiagnosed because it involves willful deception. It may be missed by medical staff. And this is something to understand. I don't know if any of you guys have worked in medical settings, but doctors and nurses, their job is, it's pounded into their head from day one of their education that their job is to help people, to treat people. Their job is not, their main job is not to detect whether people are faking. And so if you want to pick a profession of people who are relatively easy to fool, a profession of people who are indoctrinated into treating, helping, is a good place to go. And this is what happens, one of the reasons why you see this and why you don't see it. Because a lot of times, doctors aren't expecting deception. Nurses aren't expecting deception. Okay? So we don't really know the prevalence of this. Also, it could be overdiagnosed. Because maybe some doctors have heard about it, or there've been some cases and now they've been sensitized to it, or somebody's told them that everybody's faking, so now they feel like they've got to do it. Or the FDA is coming and telling them, we've got to be careful about drugs you're prescribing, whatever, or not the FDA, the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration. People are coming here trying to get narcotics, so now they're sensitized. Oh, maybe people are faking it. So maybe it's overdiagnosed. So it could be under or overdiagnosed. We really don't know at this point. Okay. They think that the prevalence of facetious psychological symptoms is lower than prevalence of physical symptoms. In other words, the first type is lower than the second type, which to me seems a little odd, because I think it's relatively easier to fake psychological symptoms than physical ones, but I think the difference is the psychological symptoms, you have to keep it up. As with the physical symptoms, you can give yourself an ulcer, you can cut yourself, or you can show up with some sort of physical complaint, and then you don't have to adjust your mentality, right? Because you show up with schizophrenia, you got to be schizophrenic on the whole time, right? You show up and you've got a heart disease thing, you can be yourself, but you have a heart disease. So maybe that's the reason, I don't know. But it's interesting to me because, on the other hand, psychological disorders should be relatively easy to fake. So I'm not sure about why that is. That's an interesting question. A person with facetious disorder, usually female, and they're usually employed in some medical fields I mentioned, like nursing or medical technology. So they have a lot of knowledge about how diseases might be produced artificially and how they might progress to help them fake things. Okay. Men with facetious disorder tend to be unmarried men who are estranged from their families. Okay. And we'll also talk in a minute about facetious disorder by proxy, and that is people, usually mothers, who will produce illnesses in their child, and a lot of times these illnesses are actually real illnesses in order to get attention. Fathers do it sometimes, but it's very, very rare. Okay? Typical woman who does this is aged 20 to 40 years. If it's a woman, they're younger, 20 to 40 years. With men, if it's a man with this, they tend to be a little bit older, middle-aged. Okay. Now, the name Munchausen Syndrome it's not really a good name. It comes from this story about this guy back in the day, Baron Munchausen, who really should be a proxy for narcissistic disorder. But this is a guy who would tell people all these sort of, fantastical stories about how he did all these amazing things. And there's a whole story about this guy, Baron Munchausen, he would come and do all these fantastical things. Which is really more narcissistic, but apparently that name got stuck onto the syndrome about people who make up these fantastic things. But now it's called facetious disorder. So in the DSM it's under facetious disorder, but you will hear Munchausen syndrome quite a bit when this is talked about. Okay, so just be aware of that. Okay. And they can do all sorts of things. They can add blood to their urine. They can inject bacteria to produce an infection. They can take medications to induce physical symptoms like you saw in the video clip there. Right? And a bunch of other presence of the following factors may raise the possibility that your patient coming in may be faking the illness. Dramatic or atypical presentation, vague or inconsistent details, a long medical record, knowledge of textbook descriptions of illness, etc., 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 coming in on the nights and weekends, all these kind of things, okay? Employment and medical related field. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Let me talk about Munchausen's by proxy. This is where a parent or caretaker deliberately exaggerates or fakes or induces physical or psychological health problems in others, usually a child. Usually it's a mother doing this in a child. Okay, it's different than maltreatment like physical abuse or sexual abuse or emotional abuse. The main reason here is to get some sort of attention from the medical professionals. Okay? Most, but not all, Munchausen's by proxy or facetious disorder by proxy cases occur in outpatient settings, but some do occur in inpatient settings as well. Okay? And again, the mother or the person doing this fits a lot of those same criteria as the person just doing simple facetious disorder. They have a lot of medical knowledge. They come nights and weekends when records aren't available, etc., etc., etc. Okay? And most of the cases are confirmed through cumulative circumstantial evidence. In rare cases, they've actually observed, they've had a video camera in the hospital, they observed the mother coming in and doing something to the kid, and they're able to catch her. But that's very rare. Usually they don't. Usually it's just circumstantial. And that can be a problem, by the way. Yes?
Have you ever seen the show The Act? It's on Hulu.
No.
It's about a real story.
About Munchausen's by proxy? Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's a couple shows where they've had Munchausen's by proxy as one of the plot lines. Yeah. I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah, Gypsy.
It's called The Act?
I think it's The Act.
Act. Okay, I'll check that out. Yeah, good. I can use that next year. I'll get a clip from that and use it next year. Okay. So again, this can cause real damage to kids. There's been, and what a lot of times they'll notice the kid is sick. The mother visits, then the kid gets sick. The mother goes away, then the kid gets better again. So this is one of the things that people go, wait a minute, what's going on? And they might covertly try to spy on her interaction with the kid. But they, if they see these patterns of these things, they'll start to suspect this. Okay? Parent caretaking can also be over-attentive and too helpful and seems to relish the attention. They may substitute blood specimens, and if they really check the blood, they'll see it's not the same type as the kid has, and all sorts of different things, right? There can also be unexplained symptoms, illnesses, and death members of other members of the family too, maybe a previous kid, and sometimes in some cases the kids can die, right? This does happen, very rarely, but it does happen. Yeah, Allie?
So people who do it to themselves are looking for the attention?
Yeah.
So are the parents looking for attention for themselves or for the kids?
For themselves. Yeah, for themselves. So they get a lot of attention by bringing the sick kid in, right? So the kid doesn't care. It's just a kid. They don't want to be sick, But the parents looking for the attention. Yeah, the parents want to get the attention. Okay. Again, you can read these MBP perpetrators. I'm using Munchausen's by proxy name, but facetious by proxy is also the same. Present as normal, seem to be good caretakers, very good liars, very believable. Plausible reasons for the behavior, lots of medical knowledge. Changes in the kids, what's going on in the kid, only occur after the mother's been around, not seen by the medical staff. Denial, any maltreatment does not stop if they are caught, but may change. They may do it with another kid or change it around. Often change healthcare providers and hospitals. May or may not appear psychologically healthy themselves. They may have facetious disorder themselves as well. You can read the rest of these. Okay. Now, not everybody believes in Munchausen's by proxy syndrome. Okay, and some people feel like some physicians have gotten a little bit overboard on this, and they start persecuting parents who are just trying to be good parents and make sure the kids get good medical care, and that's been a problem. There's been some high-profile cases where this has occurred, and there's even been a organization that has been established called MAMA, which is Mothers Against Munchausen's by Proxy Allegations, right? So these are a bunch, and you can read all the horror stories to hear these women who were accused of being Munchausen's by proxy on their kids, but actually they were just trying to get good medical care. And again, if you're a parent and you take your kid into the emergency room in the middle of the night, you know what it's like. You're very concerned, and you want to make sure the doctors are doing the right thing, and doctors do make mistakes sometimes. Right? And so, you see like you're overly involved, the doctors don't like that, they start thinking that you might be one of these kind of things. And so that's even, something that you have to be aware of. If you are a medical professional or a psychologist professional, you have to be aware of it. Be very careful about diagnosing this in somebody. Okay? You can't just willy-nilly, that person seems like she's a pain in the ass mom, so she's got this Munchausen's by proxy. No. You got to know, really, you got to go through all the warning signs, and you have to assess this very carefully. Okay? You can't just slap this label on people. And so these people are putting together a group, of innocent mothers who they feel like have been wrongly accused of this. Yes?
Do you think that mothers who go get secondary opinions or their doctor opinions can get accused of this because they're looking for?
It could be possible. Again, some doctors welcome second opinions and some do not. Again, if your kid has some sort of intractable thing and they can't really figure out what's wrong with it, you're probably going to go get a second opinion. Now, if the first doctor gets insulted by that and, decides that he thinks you're just doing Munchausen's by proxy, maybe that causes a problem. You can read some of the cases here that they have, and you'll hear about some of the stuff. And, they've called Child Protective Services or whatever. The mother's just trying to do a good job. So there have been cases where this diagnosis has been abused. Right? That's not necessarily all the time. And again, so doctors and nurses have to walk that fine line between when they suspect this going on, really confirming that it's real, before something serious happens to the kid, and also not over-diagnosing it. So it's kind of between a rock and a hard place, a little bit difficult. So all you guys, you can read this if you want. You can also, there's ways you can assess malingering. I'll let you look at that. Malingering, we're not going to go into a lot of detail about malingering in this class. We've talked about psychopaths already. Psychopaths are the ones who are going to do the malingering. These are people trying to get some sort of gain, out of the system, game the system in some way to get something they want. Even if it's a little unethical, they have to do some deception to do it, right? I just want to make sure that you understand that's not a facetious disorder. Extreme versions of Munchausen syndrome. Well, I put a question mark here because I don't know whether this is Munchausen syndrome or something else, if people are doing this in order to get attention or because they have a neurological disorder, or they might be getting some sexual jollies, as weird as that might sound out of this. But this is a disorder called apodominophilia. And this is, how to explain this to you? Maybe I should just show you a clip.
The story on today's show could be the most bizarre story we've done in our 15-year history.
By the way, I'm going to give a shout out to reality TV. Things that, licensed psychologists and physicians and other mental health professionals could never do these kind of things, but luckily we have TV producers in the world who sensationalize this stuff. And at least we now get to hear about it, even though I disagree with the using it for entertainment. But if we're looking at it as professionals, as psychologists, I think it's okay. But thank God for Jerry Springer here.
This is really crazy. My guest began wearing women's clothing at age 12 and became a transsexual at age 35. But that's not the unusual part of this story. No. This transsexual also decided at the age of 14 that she didn't want her legs. So 1 year ago, she took a saw. Why don't you hand me that? Here, hold this. Oh boy, okay. All right. From now on, who doesn't think I'm funny? So 1 year ago, she took a saw just like this. And she cut off the shirt. Stop it. She cut off her own legs. Let's meet her. Here's Sandra. Sandra, Sandra, what? Okay. What's going on? This is strange, isn't it?
Yes, it is strange.
Okay. So how old are you now?
I'm 48.
Now you're 48. When you were 35, you decided to become a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's fine. At what age did you think you didn't want your legs?
At 14.
At 14. When did you actually cut them off?
I cut this one off in 2000.
I thought that one went first, yeah. Okay. Why did you cut your leg off?
I didn't want them. My brain just kept saying get rid of them, so I had to get rid of them.
When you became a woman, did your brain say get rid of something else?
Yeah, but I couldn't cut that out.
What kind of things have you done to get your legs?
I've injected my knee with my feces, 120 cc's under my kneecap, just liquefied, pump it in. I've cut myself with razor blades. I've drove nails in the bone. My brain would just say, get a 16-penny nail and a hammer and drive it in the bone, and I just drive it in the bone. I built a guillotine and dropped it on my leg. That didn't work. So, I'm like, go back to the drawing board. I got to figure out something else. I cut the circulation off up here above the knee with a regular hose clamp that you put on the automobile.
Yeah.
And then down here, I've used like a pantyhose with like a noose on it to make it real tight. And then I just got my saw and got everything in the kitchen, got everything ready that I needed. And got up on the counter and I waited till the leg went numb and turned purple. And I got the saw and I put it on my leg and I powered it up and then I shut it off, laid it on the counter, and I looked at the saw and looked at my leg and said, well, it's now or never. And I grabbed the saw, put it on my leg.
Were you screaming?
Mm.
Were you drinking?
No.
A little bit.
Mm-hmm. Never did pass out. Never did pass out after.
You didn't pass out?
Calm and cool. My friends got there, they was always hysterical. Oh, you gonna die, you gonna die. I'm like, shut up and go call the ambulance, will you?
How did you decide after you did one?
Because I hadn't wanted both of them, neither one of them since I was 14, so, I couldn't tell somebody I didn't want both of them. I just said I didn't want one. I figured they'd really think I was nuts. I didn't want
Oh,
one.
no, now they think no, there's no way they think you're nuts to cut off one leg. Now, one's a little longer than the other.
I wanted them the same length, but they didn't. The doctors don't listen, so. Yeah.
Now, are you finished, or are we going to lose other limbs?
No, I'm finished.
What if your brain one morning says, you know what, I'm so tired of this arm?
I'm an artist. I need my arms.
Oh, you're an artist. Well, you're not a track star. See, the part that's hard for me to believe is that there was no moment of regret. I'm not saying you didn't finally conclude to do it, but it's just, that's the part that...
No regret.
Never a regret.
And I had tried to get the left leg infected several times. I figured maybe if I get it gangrene, the doctors would take it off. Every time I get it infected, they just clean it out. You know, I'm like, I'm getting tired of this. I mean, I'm getting it all infected and everything, and they're just gonna clean it out. You know, and I'm like, this ain't working. And I tied the left leg up on me, and I look in the mirror, you know, and that's it was gone under my skirt, and it made me feel like a whole person, you know.
All right, so what do you think of that? What do you think? Do you think that's...
Did you say that he injected CCs in
Yes.
his own
Yeah.
fecal matter into his kneecap?
Yeah. Yes. What do you think? Is this person trying to get attention? Is this a facetious disorder? Is this a brain, something going on in the brain here? Like alien hand, like these things don't belong to me? Is this something that's getting some sexual jollies out? We're going to talk about people who cut off things for sexual reasons later on. Yeah.
What makes you think that it's Munchausen?
They might be getting attention.
Oh, okay.
It's a good way to get attention.
I feel like you're seeking attention if you're going to come on the show.
You're seeking attention, you're coming on the show. Yeah, he's getting a lot of attention for this. Yeah.
So for Munchausen's, it doesn't have to be medical attention, it's just tension in general?
Munchausen's, it has to be usually medical attention, some kind of medical attention. Yeah, usually doctors, nurses, hospital staff, psychologists, you know, people who work in the medical field, treating people. Caregivers, some kind of health caregivers.
It didn't seem like when he was in the hospital that it was attention to be desired. It was more about like...
Yeah, and the idea that these legs didn't belong to me, right? They don't belong to me. They're not mine. They don't belong here. Just a little more to me like alien hands. So again, that's why the question mark. You know, what's going on here? Is this a neurological thing? Is it an attention thing? Is it both? Maybe it's a little bit of both. Yes.
Wouldn't it be like body integrity identity disorder?
Body integrity identity disorders. That is how I, as a psychologist, would look at this and say, yeah, there's something, the integration of the body, like something about it that is wrong. My dad has written about this, and he calls this a bodily hallucination. It's like a body psychosis. It's like having delusions about your body. And again, it's not a popular, that's not something that's entered into the mainstream of psychology or diagnosis, but this is the idea. Body integrity disorder is something, you're hallucinating something about your body that's, you know, you're not integrating the feelings about your own body. So yes, that's very good. We'll talk a little bit about that. Because we're going to talk about that too when we talk about body modification. Okay, this is an extreme version of body modification. We'll talk about some other less extreme versions, but body integrity disorder is definitely something to be thinking about, yeah.
Do you think this is type of like body dysmorphia then? I mean,
Yeah.
he didn't want it.
Yeah, body dysmorphia, yeah. Yes.
Would there be any neurological, like, structural condition that would cause you to, like, not want?
So the problem with this is my understanding of it is, and there may be newer research, my understanding is there's not a lot of cases of this. So this has not been widely studied. It's not like you get a bunch of these guys, stick them in MRI machines and see what's going on in their brains. You know, that has not, as far as I know, happened. You know, Jerry Springer didn't pay to have this guy go have an MRI test, which would have been, had I been working on the show, that would have been the first thing we would have done. Let's go see how their brain's working. You know, like this guy's saying my brain told me to get rid of my legs. Let's see how your brain is operating. Let's take a scan of it and take a look and see what's going on there. You know, but there's been so few cases of this that have been documented that we don't have that. Again, if you want to do a doctoral dissertation, it might take a little time. You could go and look into this, but you could also find other versions of body integrity disorder and start looking at brain scans. And I don't know if anybody's done that, looked at body integrity disorder, body dysmorphia, and then done some brain MRI work. That maybe that's out there. you guys could check on that and let me know. I'd be curious about that. Yeah, it'd be very interesting. Other thing is maybe you do this because you get an endorphin rush. You get a huge endorphin rush cutting your legs off. Maybe it's somewhere all these things are playing. Possible. So I know you all want to see the update because, by the way, they got huge ratings on the show. So of course the producers want to keep it going. Right. Sorry about the sound.
I didn't need them, so I didn't want them, so I cut them off.
It's just the recap.
It was there in my brain.
Did you keep them around in case you change your mind?
I tried to.
This is the recap.
All right, and we're going to see the tape now of
me reenacting cutting off my legs using mannequin legs.
I guess I can, in my mind, I can imagine how it would be done. Well, let's see. Here's the tape.
I took my first leg. I took a tourniquet, and I tied the leg off with a tourniquet. Got the leg numb. Let the circulation cut off for 40 minutes. So after about 40 minutes, the foot turned purple. And when the foot turned purple and went cold and I couldn't move it no more, I knew it was time. So I grabbed the saw. And I grabbed the saw and laid my foot sideways. I take the saw and I put it on my leg. I cut the saw off and I set it down. I said, well, I looked at the saw and I said, well, it's now or never. Either I'm going to do it now or I ain't going to do it. So I looked at the saw, I looked at my leg, looked at the saw and I said, well, it's now or never. Either I'm going to do it now or I'm not going to do it. And I grabbed the saw, and I picked it up, and I put it on my leg. And I set the saw down. And I said, you stupid bitch, what did you just do? I got on the questions, went outside and hollered for my next door neighbors. I felt with my leg, it felt relief. I didn't have to worry about that leg anymore. It felt like somebody took a 90-pound weight off of my shoulders. And it felt good. It felt great. It was real great. And it felt good. I already got rid of the one leg. Now I got to get rid of the other one. Leg number 2, I went through the same motions that I did the other one.
You get the idea here. So again, but the sense of relief after it's done, that doesn't sound like facetious disorder. So again, we don't really know what's going on here. There are some other versions of this. Do I have the other one here? And again, you picked up on that already. The body integrity identity disorder idea here, and you can. I won't play this whole thing here, but you can read this or hear this.
Leg, I'd like it to be amputated. That's what I perceive to be my end goal. BIID is shortened for Body Integrity Identity Disorder, in which it's a condition where the brain doesn't recognise an aspect of the body. For me, the map stops on the right leg 3 inches from the hip. It manifests in an itch. It would be the equivalent of someone who is growing an extra limb. It does not belong there.
Before he came out to me with it, I didn't even know about it. It felt like someone was coming out to me as gay or trans. I could see how important it was for him and how nervous he was. My first thoughts were, that's unbelievable that my friend is having to go through this.
I've tried myself a few times.
I'll let you guys watch that on your own, but you can get the idea there. Right, so again, this body integrity identity disorder, there's some idea that the body doesn't, there's something that is wrong with the body, doesn't belong. Now, body integrity identity disorder, my understanding, I could be wrong about this, is that it usually manifests in some less dramatic way than cutting off a limb. But now that there's more cases of these guys coming out, they've now, it's been expanded to include these people who have want to cut off limbs. There are some people that feel, for instance, that transsexuals maybe be suffering from body integrity identity disorder. And there's an idea that maybe some transsexuals have body integrity identity disorder and some have gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder. And is there some overlap between those two things? It's not politically correct to say people with trans people might have body integrity identity disorder. But again, as far as I know, I don't think there's been a lot of studies where they've tried to look at trans people and distinguish whether it's body integrity identity disorder or gender integrity identity disorder or some their combination, therefore both, if there's a relationship there. That also could be a really interesting area of research. Okay? I mentioned this book, Geek Love, because this is a book of fiction written about a circus family where the parents, talk about facetious disorder by proxy, the parents induced mutations in their children in order for them to be better working in the circus. The parents owned a circus, and so they induced weird mutations in the children. One of the kids is born without, he has flippers for arms and legs, and the other one is born with psychokinetic powers and a weird thing. But the interesting part about it is related to this lecture is that the kid that has flippers for arms and legs becomes a cult leader, and people join his cult, and then as part of as progressing through the cult, what they would do is they would cut off progressively more of their limbs until they reach with the sort of perfection state, which is to be like the guru and not have any arms or legs. And that would be the sort of the end state. And so again, I don't know if we've really seen this in real life, but again, it points out the idea that people will do crazy things because they think somebody else thinks it's a good idea, right? And again, we haven't seen this in real life. I don't think these guys who are cutting off their arms and legs are doing this because they're part of a cult. But in my mind, that's not such a far-fetched idea. It's a really interesting book. It's really, it's well written. It's a very interesting book. If you want a good summer reading, I recommend it. Another version of this, I've mentioned this briefly, is called paralysis disorder, or voluntary paralysis. Also a version of this podominophilia or body integrity disorder. And this is a woman.
Chloe James White spends her days confined to a wheelchair. It's tough to get around, and she struggles with living in a world that isn't built for the disabled. However, Chloe is actually able to walk perfectly, and chooses to live her life like a paraplegic, due to a rare psychological disorder called BIID. Despite wishing she was paralysed, Chloe still takes part in extreme sports like skiing. BIID has led Chloe, a Cambridge University educated research scientist, to harm herself in a bid to become paraplegic for real.
I have fantasies about having a car wreck and becoming paraplegic from a car wreck.
Perhaps most shockingly of all, London-born Chloe is on a quest to find a surgeon willing to operate in order to paralyse her legs forever.
I did find a surgeon in another country who would be prepared to do femoral and sciatic nerve transections to paralyze my legs. It would be at least $25,000. I don't have the money to do it. That's basically the only reason that I've not yet had surgery.
For her whole life, Chloe has wished, more than anything, that she was disabled.
All right, I'll let you guys watch that on your own. This case, to me, seems to me possibly maybe a little more like facetious disorder. She may be getting a lot of attention because she's not really actually doing the thing, right? So I don't know. Again, I don't know. I'm just taking a guess. These are very interesting sorts of things, and you guys can think about this and come to your own conclusions about it. I can't tell you one thing. Again, body integrity, identity disorder, we definitely want to think about that. We want to think maybe facetious disorder, possibly. We might think about some sort of neurological condition. As of yet, not seeing that on an MRI, but possibly could be there. All this kind of stuff. And again, spiritual dimensions to body modification. I mentioned this in my 344 class, and I'll talk a little bit about this later on, about people who do body modifications or extreme things, body modifications in order to get a spiritual kind of lift out of this. And again, I talk a lot about this in my 344 class. I think I'm going to talk about this later on in the semester, but I thought I'd mention this to you guys anyway. And these guys, and I'm not showing you the most extreme ones here, but these guys, these are sadhus in India, and they do all sorts of extreme spiritual practices, many of which can include some severe body modification. When my wife was in India, she met a sadhu, and every year what he would do is cut off another inch of his left arm. He started, and every year he cut off another inch. And when she met him, he was up to about here. Now, is that a podominophilia? Is that body integrity disorder? Is that a spiritual practice? Big question mark there. Why is he doing this, right? So I'll leave you with that. You can think about that a little bit. I wanted to mention Ganser syndrome for the minute before we go. And this is people who have, this is where the person is a facetious disorder, where a person attempts to mimic a mental illness, and this is done by confabulating or making approximate or nonsensical answers to questions. So you ask me, how much is 2 and 2, and I tell you it's 6. I make up words, which is confabulating. I make up things that don't make any sense. This is commonly found in prison, and this is, we can think of this again as prison psychosis or malingering psychosis. And usually people who have Ganser syndrome usually have some kind of personality disorder, usually antisocial personality disorder, and that they're doing this for some kind of gain, either to get off for insanity, or get a lesser sentence, or to get something, get some sort of thing they wouldn't be able to get otherwise. Okay. I just mentioned that it's named after this guy Ganser. And if you work in a prison, you'll probably see you may have a chance to see Ganser syndrome. We actually had a woman who worked here who suffered from Ganser. So I was amazed when I saw her. She was an administrator, and I was just amazed when I talked to her, like, oh my God, this is Ganser syndrome. And I'd start like walking, following her around, like writing things down that she'd do. She'd confabulate, make up stuff, and it was clearly to get for some gain, keep a job, basically. All right, I think that's all I have. You can read about that a little bit, and that's it for the day. Thank you.